He posted one story online and then disappeared before anyone could ask what really followed him out of that canyon.
911, what's your emergency?
After his post went viral, thousands of readers flooded the comments section with questions. They wanted more details. They wanted clarification. They wanted to know what happened next. They assumed he would return and answer those questions, maybe add context, maybe update the story with new information. But he never did. His profile froze overnight. No replies, no updates, no acknowledgement that the post had even blown up the way it did. Nothing. Just complete, total silence. The account remained active in a technical sense. You could still visit the page, still see the post sitting there like a digital tombstone, but the person behind it had vanished as if he'd never existed at all. Out of curiosity, and maybe out of something darker that I can't quite explain, I tried reaching out to the only person mentioned in his account, the friend he'd gone on the trip with. His name was Jake. Finding Jake took me days. He didn't have much of an online presence, no social media accounts that matched his name and location, no public profiles, no digital footprint to speak of. But I kept digging through old forum posts, archived websites and cached pages until I finally found a phone number buried in an old hiking group registration form from 3 years prior. When he finally picked up, I didn't even get a chance to introduce myself properly. I barely managed to say my name and mention that I was researching the canyon post before he cut me off. His voice was low, strained, almost hoarse, like he'd been shouting or hadn't slept in days. He just muttered, "Please stop digging into this," and then the line went dead. He'd hung up. The tremble in his voice wasn't irritation or annoyance. It wasn't the voice of someone who was tired of being bothered by internet strangers. It was fear. Pure, unfiltered fear. The kind of fear that comes from knowing something you wish you didn't. The kind of fear that makes you want to forget, to pretend, to bury the memory so deep it might never resurface. I wasn't the first person who'd tried to contact him. That much was clear. And he clearly wanted this story buried. He wanted it forgotten. He wanted people to stop asking questions and stop digging into what happened on that trip. But the desperation in his voice, the terror that came through even in those few words, only made me want to dig deeper. It confirmed that something real had happened, something that had affected both of them in ways that couldn't be explained away as a campfire story or an exaggerated hiking tale. While checking archived versions of the original blog post, I found a small detail that most people had missed. The kind of detail you only notice if you're obsessively comparing different cached versions of the same page. The final edit timestamp showed that someone, almost certainly the original author, had gone back into the post 2 hours after it had gone live. 2 hours after it had already started spreading across social media and horror forums. Someone, at his changes, had removed something from the text. But the version that was saved publicly, the version that everyone read and shared and discussed, never showed what those edits were. Whatever he had removed, whatever additional information he had decided was too dangerous or too revealing to leave in the post, stayed locked behind a corrupted archive file that refused to load properly no matter how many times I tried to access it. So I decided to take a different approach. I reached out to the motel he had mentioned in his post, the place where he and Jake had stopped to rest after fleeing the canyon. It was a small roadside motel, the kind that still has a physical guest book and a clerk who's been working the front desk for 20 years. When I called, the clerk didn't recognize the name I gave him. But when I described the two travelers, their approximate ages, the timeline of when they would have checked in, and the fact that they'd arrived in the middle of the night looking shaken and disturbed, he suddenly went quiet for a long moment. Then he said, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Room 27. They left in a hurry, didn't even close the door behind them." According to him, when housekeeping went to clean the room the next morning, they found it in a state that suggested the occupants had been in some kind of distress. The sheets were torn off the bed and twisted into knots. Drawers were left open, their contents spilled onto the floor as if someone had been frantically searching for something. The bathroom light was shattered from the inside, glass scattered across the tile floor. And on the wall, this was the part that the clerk clearly didn't want to talk about, the part that made his voice drop even lower. There were fingerprints. But not normal fingerprints. These were long, elongated, too long to belong to a human hand. The fingers that had left those marks would have been at least twice the length of normal human digits. The clerk said housekeeping had tried to clean them off, but the marks seemed to resist being wiped away. They had to paint over that section of the wall. And even then, he said, if you looked at it from the right angle in certain lighting, you could still see the impressions underneath the fresh paint, like whatever had left those marks had pressed into the wall with enough force to leave a permanent indentation.
That was the moment I realized something crucial. The blogger didn't run from what he saw in the canyon. He ran from what followed him out of it. Whatever entity or presence or creature he had encountered in those woods hadn't stayed behind. It had tracked them. It had followed them to the motel. It had been in that room with them while they tried to process what they'd experienced. And based on the state of that room, based on those impossible fingerprints on the wall, it had made its presence known. When I started checking traffic cam footage from the highway near the reservation, trying to verify the timeline and see if I could spot their vehicle leaving the area, I found something that made my blood run cold. There was one clip, just a few seconds long, captured by a camera positioned at a rest stop about 15 miles from the canyon entrance. The timestamp matched the night of their trip. You can see a car speeding through the darkness, moving faster than the posted speed limit, clearly in a hurry to get away from something. But what made my stomach drop, what made me watch that clip over and over again until I'd memorized every frame, wasn't the car itself. It was the reflection visible in the rear window. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by a street lamp or a tree branch. But the more I watched it, the more I enhanced the image and adjusted the contrast, the clearer it became. There was a silhouette in that reflection. Tall, impossibly tall, stretched vertically in a way that defied normal human proportions. Not on the road behind the car, not standing on the highway, in the window, as if it was inside the vehicle, leaning forward from the back seat, pressing its face close to the glass, like it was whispering through the window, like it was speaking directly to the driver. I tried to track the original poster's IP address, hoping to find a new lead or at least confirm his general location. What I found instead was deeply disturbing. There wasn't just one IP address. There was a trail of deleted accounts, stretching back months before the Canyon post, a chain of them, each one created shortly after the previous account was deactivated or abandoned. Every username included the same strange pattern of letters, not random gibberish, but something that seemed deliberate, something that looked like it might be a code or a message, as if he was trying to leave breadcrumbs, or as if he was trying to warn people without being too obvious about it, without drawing attention from whatever he thought might be watching his online activity. When I contacted a forum member who claimed to know the guy personally, someone who had commented on one of his older posts saying they'd hiked together before, he initially agreed to speak with me. He seemed open to the conversation. But the moment I mentioned the specific canyon, the specific trip, the specific post that had gone viral, everything changed. He went silent. Not the kind of silence that comes from thinking about your answer, the kind of silence that comes from profound fear, from being confronted with something you'd been trying to forget. After nearly a minute of dead air on the line, I heard him take a shaky breath and mutter, "If you saw what he saw, you wouldn't be calling me right now. You wouldn't be asking these questions. You'd be trying to forget it ever happened." Then he hung up. And when I tried calling back, the number had been disconnected. When I tried reaching out through the forum, his account had been deleted. Every trace of his online presence wiped clean within hours of our conversation. Like he'd decided that even tangential connection to this story was too dangerous. Like he'd realized that asking questions, that showing interest, that demonstrating knowledge of what had happened might somehow mark him as a target for whatever was involved in this situation. I don't know where the blogger is now. No one does. I've asked around. I've contacted people who knew him, people who had interacted with his posts, people who might have had any information about his current whereabouts. Nobody has heard from him. His last known online activity, according to server logs I managed to access through some creative research methods I probably shouldn't detail here, was a short login session from an abandoned rest stop 5 miles outside the reservation boundary. The login occurred at 3:17 a.m. He was online for less than 2 minutes, then the signal vanished. No phone activity after that, no bank card usage, no digital footprint whatsoever, no trace of him existing in the modern world where almost everyone leaves constant digital evidence of their presence.
But the strangest part, the detail that keeps me awake at night, the thing that makes me question whether I should even be telling this story, happened about a week after he disappeared. Someone, or something, used his account to post a final message. The notification went out to everyone who was following his profile, people who had been waiting for an update, waiting for an explanation, waiting for him to come back and answer the hundreds of questions that had piled up in the comments. They all got the notification. New post, new activity. He was back. Except he wasn't. The text field was completely empty. No words, no explanation, no apology for the silence, no acknowledgement of the thousands of comments and messages that had accumulated in the comments. The only thing attached to the post was a file, an audio file. The format was unusual, not one of the standard types you'd normally see on that platform. The file size was small, just 6 seconds long. 6 seconds of audio that would change everything. At first, when I downloaded it and played it, I thought it was just static, white noise, the kind of audio corruption you get from a damaged file or a failed recording. But I kept listening. I played it through headphones with the volume turned up, trying to hear anything underneath that static. And that's when I heard it. Faint. Warped. Stretched like a broken recording being played underwater or through a damaged speaker. But unmistakably there. A voice. Speaking. Calling out from somewhere dark and distant and wrong. A voice that, according to people who had heard the blogger speak in podcast interviews or voice messages, sounded exactly like him. Same tone, same cadence, same vocal patterns, but distorted, processed through something that made it sound simultaneously close and impossibly far away. The voice said 2 words. Just 2 words. but they were enough to make everyone who heard the recording immediately stop investigating. Enough to make forum threads go silent. Enough to make people delete their comments and distance themselves from the entire story. The voice said, "Come here." Not a statement, not exactly a command, something in between, an invitation and a threat wrapped together in two simple words. And the way it was said, the inflection, the tone underneath the distortion, suggested that whoever or whatever was speaking knew it was being heard, knew that people were listening, knew that the message would spread, was counting on it spreading, was using the dead man's account, the dead man's voice, the dead man's digital presence to reach out to the living, to anyone who had been following the story, to anyone who had been asking questions, to anyone who might be curious enough, foolish enough, or brave enough to go looking for answers in that canyon. The post was removed within hours, not by the platform administrators, as far as I can tell, but by someone who had access to the account. The audio file was deleted from the servers, but by then it had already been downloaded by hundreds of people. It had already been shared. It had already been analyzed and discussed by amateur audio engineers and paranormal researchers and true crime enthusiasts. And everyone who listened to it came away with the same unsettling conclusion. Whatever had created that recording, whatever had spoken those words, it wasn't human. And it knew where the listeners were. It knew who was paying attention. It was aware of being investigated. I've spent months researching this case. I've driven to the canyon myself, though I didn't go inside. I stood at the trailhead and looked into those woods and felt something looking back. I've interviewed park rangers who work in that area, and while most of them won't speak on the record, off the record, they'll tell you things. They'll tell you about hikers who go missing in that specific region at rates higher than anywhere else in the park system. They'll tell you about search parties that refuse to continue after nightfall because the searchers report hearing things, voices calling to them in the darkness, voices that sound exactly like the person they're searching for, even though that person's body was eventually found miles away in a completely different direction.
They'll tell you about trail cameras that malfunction in specific areas, cameras that produce images showing figures that shouldn't be there, figures that are too tall, too thin, too wrong to be human or animal, figures that appear in multiple frames across multiple cameras, suggesting something is moving through the forest with purpose and intelligence, deliberately positioning itself where it will be captured on film, as if it wants to be seen, as if it's sending a message. I've spoken with members of the local Native American tribe whose reservation borders the canyon. They won't discuss it directly, but they've made it clear that certain areas are considered forbidden for very specific reasons, reasons that go back generations, reasons that are tied to stories older than the modern United States, older than the European colonization of this continent, older than written history in this region. Stories about things that lived in those canyons long before humans arrived. Things that were here first and have never left. Things that occasionally take an interest in humans who wander into their territory. Things that sometimes follow those humans home. The blogger's family, when I finally managed to contact them, wouldn't speak to me. His mother hung up the moment I mentioned his name. His brother sent me a single text message that just said, "Let him rest," before blocking my number. The only thing I learned from them came through a cousin who was willing to talk briefly. She told me that after he disappeared, his apartment was found completely empty. Not robbed, not ransacked, empty. As if he'd methodically removed every personal item, every photograph, every piece of evidence that he'd ever lived there. But the landlord said he never saw him move out, never saw any moving truck or boxes being carried down the stairs. The apartment was occupied one day and completely vacant the next,
as if everything inside had simply vanished overnight. I've tried to find Jake again, multiple times, using every method I can think of, but there's no trace of him either. His phone number is disconnected. His last known address is now occupied by different tenants who'd never heard of him. His employer, when I called the company he'd worked for, claimed they had no record of anyone by that name ever being employed there, which is impossible because I'd found his LinkedIn profile before it was deleted, and it clearly listed that company. It's as if both men have been systematically erased from every database, every record, every system that normally tracks human existence in modern society. The motel where they stayed has since closed down. When I drove past it last month, the building was abandoned. Windows broken, parking lot overgrown with weeds, a foreclosure notice on the door. But room 27, the room where they had stayed, was different from the others. All the other rooms had broken windows and open doors from vandals and weather damage. Room 27's door was closed, locked. The window was intact but completely blacked out from the inside, as if someone had painted it or covered it with something that blocked all light. And on that door, someone had spray painted a symbol. Not graffiti, not a tag. A symbol that I later found in my research matches protective markings used by various cultures to ward off evil spirits or malevolent entities. I've analyzed that 6-second audio file more times than I can count. I've run it through every audio program I have access to. I've slowed it down, sped it up, isolated different frequency ranges, applied filters to remove the static and clarify what's underneath. And the more I analyze it, the more disturbing it becomes. Because underneath those two words, underneath that distorted voice saying, "Come here," there are other sounds layered beneath it, whispers, multiple whispers, overlapping each other, saying different things. Some in English, some in languages I don't recognize, some that might not be language at all, but just sound shaped to resemble language. And in the background, almost imperceptible unless you're specifically listening for it, there's another sound, a rhythmic sound, like footsteps, but not normal footsteps. These have an odd cadence, too many beats, as if whatever is walking has more than two legs, or as if multiple entities are walking in perfect synchronization. And those footsteps are getting closer throughout the 6-second recording. They start distant and then close, very close. As if whatever is speaking, whatever is using the blogger's voice to call out, is approaching the microphone, approaching the listener, coming closer with each step.
I've had nightmares since I started investigating this case. Vivid nightmares that feel more like memories than dreams. In them, I'm hiking through that canyon. The trail is exactly as the blogger described it in his post. The trees are too close together. The shadows are too dark. The silence is too complete. And I can feel something watching me, following me, keeping pace with me just outside my field of vision. When I turn to look, there's nothing there, but the moment I start walking again, I can sense it resume its pursuit, and I know with absolute certainty that it's only a matter of time before it stops following and starts approaching. Last week, I woke up at 3:17 a.m., the exact time of the blogger's last login. I woke up suddenly, completely alert, with no memory of what had woken me. My phone was on the nightstand where I'd left it, but the screen was on, glowing in the darkness. I hadn't touched it. I always keep it face down when I sleep, but somehow it had flipped itself over, and the screen was active. There was a notification, a message, from an unknown number,
No caller ID, no contact information, just a message that contained a single audio file. I haven't opened it yet. It's been sitting in my messages for a week now. Every day I tell myself I'm going to delete it. Every day I come close, but I can't quite bring myself to do it. Because part of me, the part that's been obsessed with this case for months, the part that needs to know what really happened in that canyon, wants to open it, wants to listen, wants to know if it's the same 6-second recording or if it's something new, something meant specifically for me. But another part of me, the part that's heard the fear in Jake's voice, the part that's seen what happened to everyone else who got too close to this story, the part that's been having those nightmares, knows that opening that file would be a mistake, knows that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again, knows that some invitations should never be accepted. The blogger made the mistake of sharing his story, of posting what he'd experienced, of trying to warn people, and now he's gone, erased from existence as thoroughly as if he'd never been born. Jake is gone too. The motel clerk who spoke to me won't answer his phone anymore. The forum member who knew them both has vanished. Everyone who got too close, everyone who knew too much, everyone who tried to investigate what really happened has either disappeared or learned to stay silent. So I'm ending my investigation here. I'm posting this account of what I've learned, and then I'm deleting every file I've collected. I'm destroying my notes. I'm wiping my hard drive. I'm doing everything I can to distance myself from this story. Because I finally realized what everyone else figured out before they went silent. This isn't just a creepy story. This isn't just an unsolved mystery. This is an active threat. Something is still out there. Something that followed the blogger out of that canyon. Something that's been systematically eliminating or silencing everyone who shows too much interest in what happened. And that audio file sitting in my messages, the one I still haven't opened, is either a test or a warning. Either it's trying to determine if I'm curious enough to listen, foolish enough to take the bait, or it's telling me that I'm next on the list, that I've gotten too close, that I've learned too much, that my name has been added to whatever list contains everyone else who disappeared. I don't know what I'm going to do with that file. I don't know if I'll be strong enough to resist opening it. I don't know if deleting it will be enough to save me, or if simply receiving it means I've already been marked. All I know is that after tonight, after I post this, I'm done. I'm not answering any questions. I'm not providing any additional information. I'm not engaging with anyone who contacts me about this story. I'm going to pretend as best I can that I never heard about the canyon, never read that blog post, never started investigating what really happened. Because the alternative, the path where I keep digging and keep asking questions and keep trying to uncover the truth, ends with me disappearing too. Ends with my phone going silent at 3:17 a.m. Ends with my accounts being used to post cryptic messages and distorted audio files. Ends with me becoming another warning, another cautionary tale, another voice calling out from the darkness, inviting others to come closer, to investigate, to follow the same path that leads to whatever is waiting in that canyon. If you're reading this, if you've heard the audio file, if you've been following this story, I'm telling you now, stop. Delete everything. Forget you ever heard about this canyon. Don't go looking for the canyon. Don't try to verify what I've written. Don't attempt to contact anyone involved. Because whatever is out there, it's watching. It's listening. It's waiting. And it knows when someone starts paying too much attention. It knows when someone gets too close to the truth. And when it notices you, when it marks you, when it decides you've become interesting enough to pursue, there's no escaping it. There's no going back. There's only the inevitable moment when you, too, disappear, and someone else finds your account and starts investigating, starting the cycle all over again.
If this wasn't just a story, then something out there is still mimicking his voice and waiting.